out of the 28 countries we looked at, in 7 countries, 40% plus of the children in those countries are demonstrating little or no value added to their education after 4, 5, or 6 years of schooling. This starts at Chad with 40%, all the way up to Nigeria, where we found that 58.3% of the children are actually scoring at a level so low that it shows that they're not mastering basic reading and math by the end of primary school. And what I want to do now is just look at a couple of the different countries to see what we found. So South Africa, a country that we think of as relatively well off in the continent compared to many of the others, over a third of the children are not learning the basic skills, so unable to read and write at the end of primary school. And then we can look at the issues of inequality in learning, and this is where the wealth disparity really comes in to effect when we look at the richest 20% and the poorest 20%. The poorest 20%, of those poorest 20%, over half of those children are unable to read or do basic math at the end of primary school, compared to only 10% of the wealthiest 20% of the population. If we look at Zimbabwe, this is a great example of the rural versus urban divide in the continent. So on average, 22.6% of the children are unable to meet that basic threshold at the end of primary to show a minimum level of competency. But if we look at the urban versus rural, 30% of the rural kids are unable to meet that basic level compared to only 5.9% of those in an urban environment. And then if we look at the issue of the population weights and what that actually says, it paints a really disturbing picture. So if we look at the data from Nigeria, so this is the country that we saw the highest proportion of children not meeting those basic learning levels at the end of primary school, 58.3%. If you look at the 21.6 million children enrolled in primary school, and you add that weight to it, it shows that we have 12.6 million children who are passing through the school system and by the end of primary school are unable to read, unable to do math. And you add into that the 10 million children who don't go to school in Nigeria, you have one country that's comprising of 20 million children who are learning very little or learning nothing, which has a huge impact for future prospects for the country and for the region as a whole. And what we then did is we looked at the population weight. So what we did with Nigeria, we did that for all of the countries in the barometer, and then we also looked at weighting for countries that aren't covered in the actual data set of the 28 countries to make a whole entire projection of what we think our best guess is in terms of what's happening in the continent of Sub-Saharan Africa. So we estimate there are 128 million plus or minus children of primary school age. In that, we know that based on the barometer, there are 70.4 million children that we assume are in school and meeting some basic level of competency at the end of primary school. There are 17 million children who will never see the inside of a school, will never go to school in their life. And what we've done is we've also compensated for those who don't start school on time, so the 31 million children out of school who will enter late. So they're included in these numbers of children that are in school and learning and in school and not learning. And then of the children that actually do go to school, we estimate that a little over 40 million children will have so little value added to their education that they will not be able to do basic literacy or not have basic literacy and math skills. So at the end of the day, we estimate that 45% of the children in Africa are falling through the cracks. They're either not in school or in school and not receiving an education of a quality that actually gives them any chance in life.